Well, good morning, friends. This morning we'd like to provide an overview with this panel on the greater than half of our Army Aviation team that resides in the reserve component, in our Army National Guard, in our U.S. Army Reserve, as well as Division West's efforts in support of Guard and Reserve readiness. Representing the National Guard, we have Brigadier General Tim Gowan, Assistant Adjutant General in Maryland, as well as the DCG of U.S. Army Aviation Center of Excellence. And then we have Colonel Ray Davis, the Chief of the Army National Guard Aviation. Representing U.S. Army Reserve Aviation, we have Major General Troy Cope, Commanding General of the 99th Readiness Division, and we have Brigadier General Scott Morcom, Army Reserve Aviation Command, Commanding General. We'll begin our discussion with some brief comments from each of our teammates, and then we'll go into a question and answer session. Ray, I'd like to turn it over to you for opening comments from the Guard.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to, first of all, say it's an honor and privilege to take part in this forum. As we discuss, some of the challenges ahead and how we're going to work together as a total Army enterprise to meet those challenges. The Army National Guard Aviation enterprise as a whole, we're focused on the horizon. We're looking forward to what we need to do, working within the enterprise, to help achieve those desired end states, to ensure that our formations are ready when called upon, both for our warfight mission, which is our primary focus, and then also domestically whenever our states require our services. With that end, we recognize that there's always going to be constraints, both fiscally within the dollars that we have to spend and also in equipping. But our desire is to work within the enterprise, fair, open, transparent processes where everyone has a seat at the table, and we determine what's in the best interest of our nation and our Army as we move forward. And that's underway. The enterprise is healthy, and there's a lot of collaboration that goes on a daily basis, both with my staff in the Pentagon and then out in the field within the entire enterprise. Working toward building that trust and confidence within our entire Army Guard formation, so they know that we're advocating to ensure that our formations have the best equipment and are best prepared when they're mobilized and called upon. Who we are as an Army National Guard force, we're 46% of the aviation portfolio, and that equates to 43% of the deployable force. Today, right now, we're supporting 55% of the named operations, both Spartan Shield, Inherent Resolve, and Freedom Sentinel. And on any given day, that's about 2,200 aviation professionals and about 140 aircraft. And we've been maintaining that for quite some time now, and I don't see any changes on the horizon with regards to that. With regards to the op tempo, most of our formations are at about that 1 to 4, that programmed spin rate, with a notable exception of our Chinook formations and our medevac, which are about 1 to 3, and in some cases, when you look at the individual units, they're considerably less than that. For the near term, we're focused on modernization of our platforms, the digitization of our fleet to ensure that we remain viable and we're able to meet our mission requirements. We're going to focus on our current fleet, but we also want to be a vital contributor to future vertical lift, and there's some plans underway to ensure that end. With the UH-60 Mike, we're focused on continuing the fielding of those aircraft. We have a deliberate process within the Army National Guard to identify those units, and it's based upon when they're going to mobilize and deploy to ensure there's proper time to allow that unit to go through that training process and validate as a Mike model unit before they deploy. The units that aren't selected for the Mike model will be UH-60 Victor, and we're working within the enterprise and the PMs to ensure that the Guard requirements are also included in that aircraft. For the AH-64, we currently have 4 battalions remaining within the Army National Guard. That NCFA recommendation said 4 battalions of structure, 3 battalions of aircraft. That's created some challenges, but we're working through those. Presently, we have 1 ARB deployed in Afghanistan, and they're going to be replaced in the near future by our 2nd deployment. Both of those units are on track to meet requirements and are doing a fantastic job. We're working to have that gap in capability, those additional aircraft, brought into the Army National Guard so we can stabilize those formations and prevent the aircraft transfers that have to take place to ensure we have the units filled out when they're ready to deploy. And then on the UH-72 Alpha, they've served the Army and the citizens well over the last 10 years, but it's time to start looking at how we recapitalize that aircraft to ensure that it is vital in the future. Some of the initiatives that are underway within the Army National Guard, about 2 years ago almost now, I went out to NTC to visit one of our task force formations. It was a battalion task force from 3 states. They had 3 different aircraft, and what I found that they were utilizing 3 SOPs, 3 different risk assessment worksheets, and they were getting the job done, but they were making it a lot more challenging than it had to be. And that's when it really dawned on me that we needed to have a common SOP throughout our formations. It's not a new idea, but it's an idea that really no one had taken ownership of to date and really done something with it. I was able to put together a team within the Army National Guard of professionals represented across all 54, and through more than a year of work, they developed an SOP that is currently being reviewed by the states, and we're looking to implement this thing in the next 90 days. We just didn't want to keep that just in the National Guard. We saw great value in sharing that amongst the enterprise. Our Compo 3 brothers have a copy of it as well. They're providing input because they want to adopt it. Working with Fort Rucker and DES, they were also looking at it because at the same time, they had a similar initiative underway, and they've created a battle book that will be issued to new flight school students when they go to Fort Rucker. And this battle book will carry them through their training, but will also, the procedures that are laid out within that battle book will be the same in the unit. Wherever they PCS to, or if they come to a guard unit in the future, they'll have a common start point. And really the goodness comes in when we build those formations, sometimes at Fort Hood, post-mobilization, some of these units, it's the first time they've come together. And to have that common start point will allow us to build that CAB team more quickly and focus on what's important, the higher level collective training. There's also a benefit for domestic response when we bring aircraft in from one state to support another, like we did last fall. To have that common start point within our formations, we see great value in that, and we're excited about what that's going to bring. The Army, right after the National Commission of the Future of the Army, they also conducted a study, the Holistic Army Aviation Task Force, and that consisted of aviation professionals from all 3 compos, pulled from all parts of the world. They took about 90 days and they assessed how do we regain decisive action capability within our Army? Are we best utilizing our resources? Do we have the right focus? And there were 63 recommendations that came out of that, and 4 of those were directed specifically to the Army National Guard, and we were focusing on implementing those recommendations. Some of the other 63, we have equities in, but these 4 were ones that we were focused on. 2 of those I want to talk about. Recommendation number 8. It said that we should look at reorganizing our aviation brigades in a manner that would set the conditions for collective training. If you look at how we're arrayed right now, we're split in multiple states from one coast to the other, an average of about 15 states, and in some cases more than 20. And by reorganization of the battalion and company flags, we can actually bring that down to about 5 or 6 states that are contiguous. We only want to focus on the flags, not the people or the aircraft, because that would incur an additional institutional training bill, which we really want to avoid. And this will take place over time, but the end state or the goal is to set the conditions for a combat aviation brigade and the Guard to train collectively pre-mob, build those habitual relationships within the command, so when they arrive at Fort Hood, it's not the first time that they've seen each other. Instead of focusing on the name tapes and trying to learn who's who, they know the strengths and weaknesses throughout that formation, and they're ready to train at a higher level and reduce that post-mobilization training time. And then also in support of that is HADF recommendation number 10, which requires the Army National Guard, or recommends the Guard create a policy to empower a brigade commander, in this case aviation, authorities to coordinate across state lines. And we all know, the Guard, how we're structured, that that chain of command ends at that adjutant general and the governor. But we're not trying to impede on that, but really create a policy that's supported by the 54, endorsed by those adjutants general, to recognize the requirements of an aviation brigade commander. And we're within the Army National Guard Bureau, we're working to support that with a program, we call it the Readiness Resource Review. And we actually conducted one here yesterday, and we're looking at those aviation brigades that are deploying in the next 2 to 3 years. And we sit down with that cab staff, that commander, those subordinate battalion commanders, and we map out from year 1 all the way to the ready year, those training gates that are required that we need to hit, the milestones, and put them on a glide slope to meet the training requirements. When they arrive at the MOB station, they're ready to train at that collective level. For the Army National Guard Bureau, it's our job to ensure that we resource that. So it gives us an opportunity to map out the requirements, and then we can take that back and determine how we're going to provide the resources to enable that success. Over the past 15 years, the Army National Guard has supported 21 aviation brigade deployments, 12 attack reconnaissance battalion deployments, 15 GSABs, and 50 plus medevac elements at the platoon and company level. And our focus moving forward, I think Aristotle said it, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And that's really our focus. As an enterprise working together, we can achieve much more, working together to achieve those ends. And that's our focus moving forward. Sir, thank you.
Okay, it's on. Hey, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming. Thanks for giving us a chance to talk about the great things the National Guard's doing, and Total Army for that matter. I just wanted to pile on to a couple of things that Ray mentioned that the National Guard is doing. My position as the Deputy Commanding General of USACE, Fort Rucker, kind of puts me in a position where I straddle both Compo 1 and Compo 2. And to that end, one of my objectives has been to improve communications, break down some of the barriers between the components, particularly 1 and 2. And a couple of things that we're doing here are making progress towards that end. Ray mentioned HADF. One of the HADF objectives is to formulate a working group among the aviation enterprise, and of course the six-pack does that. Just this past year, or since I've been in a position, about a year and a half or so, General Gaylor, the commander of USACE, has given us the opportunity to participate in the six-pack, and that's gone a long way to affect communications, make each other aware of issues, solve problems together, and it's a weekly communication, and it's really made great gains towards transparency and improving communication. So that's certainly a big step in the right direction. The second big initiative is deploying Component 2 officers as deputy commanding officers of some of the cabs that are going down range. For example, First ID, Third ID cabs, both have had 05 deputy commanding officers from Compo 2. The great thing about that is not only do we now have a greater understanding within those formations about the strengths and weaknesses, capabilities of the different components, because generally they're multi-compo organizations, but then also that gives a chance for that 05 to strengthen and develop his command skills, and then that sets him up to be a future cab commander, and it's a great add to us. We're looking to find a DCO now for the 101st cab going out the door, but then also with the recent deployment of the 29th cab, we were able to bring a Compo 1 05 on to serve as the DCO for that, and it really added benefit, again, in the opposite direction, improving that officer, but then also gaining familiarity with the strengths and weaknesses of the various compos. So I think that's a great way to improve the communications and relationships among compos. And then finally, I'll just touch on future vertical lift. Breaking news as of yesterday, the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army has asked us to provide leadership to the future vertical lift team. We're going to be a part of that and be right there in the decision making for a new start program, and making sure that our capabilities are accounted for. And one of the things that the Vice put out is that the future vertical lift will not adversely affect Compo 2, and so that's a great thing. I think we're certainly heading off in the right direction on that. That's all I've got, sir. Thanks again.
Thanks a lot. Now we'll turn it over to Scott Morcom, and we'll lead into the U.S. Army Reserve Aviation.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here, and especially thank you, Major General Peterson, for teeing this up today, giving us the opportunity to highlight the total force partnership that we have, that we're continuing to develop, that we've been fighting, for the last 17 years, pretty much straight. So, said Scott Morcom, Commander of the Army Reserve Aviation Command. Give me a couple minutes here. I'm going to tell you quickly who we are, where we're at. I'd like to talk about our relevance and commitments. Then we'll get to the meat and potatoes, which is the total force partnership, alignments, and relationships that we have, that we've been fighting, and that we're continuing to build to make us better into the fight. Next slide, sir. Yeah, so the Army Reserve Aviation is one unified, one-star command. That's 12 states, 14 different sites, arrayed in two brigades, 2 ECABs, one in the East Coast, 244th, and then a West Coast aligned 11th cab. That's all total 4,400 soldiers, about 600 civilians, and about 228 aircraft. Okay, next slide, sir. So real quickly, this is just a snapshot of what we're doing, what we're going to be doing into the future, and it's pretty much a picture of what we've been doing since 2003. The fact is that the sun has never stopped shining on the U.S. Army. And never stopped shining on the U.S. Army Aviation Reserve. We're in about 3 different continents, both theaters, and then various other exercises. We have some big commitments coming forward. We're sending out a battalion this summer to fight with our multi-compo brothers, and then a brigade out sometime early next year. Now with that, let me get to the meat and potatoes here, and hopefully tee up some conversation. And the goal here today is to get questions and discussion going here to dive deeper into that. And what I'm talking about is the we here, why we're up here, which is the total force, the both air and ground. Okay, I'm going to talk about that a little bit, but we're going to highlight some of the relationships that we have that are enduring, continuing both in the fight and as importantly, back CONUS as we train up to go forward into the future, into this fight and a bigger fight. So we have bigger things to do. So we got to think bigger, we got to train bigger, and we definitely have to continue to work together. So first off, our First Army partners, it used to be that we would mobilize and then start a relationship with First Army. They would train us up and send us out. Well, that's no longer the case. It's continual. It's constant. Pre-mob, post-mob, exercise. We've set up a OCT, observer, controller, trainer, mentor program division at the command, working with First Army to have a continual working relationship commitment every day, every month, across several exercises every year. We have a continual relationship and an alignment with the 101st, 1st AD, 7th Group, Kentucky National Guard, Indiana National Guard, U.S. Army Special Operations Air Command. We do Homeland Defense, and all of these are both, not just air. We're not just working with cabs and the air component. More importantly, with our ground partners, doing assaults. We did air assault school last week down at the 101st since Air Forward. We continue to work with our National Guard ground partners, building that trust, that working relationship, that understanding that is required to build our effectiveness, our readiness, our lethality going forward. One of the ways that we work together on a continual basis, on a yearly basis, is through collective training exercises. Both CTCs, Guard-based sponsored and events, the Army Reserve collective training exercises that are an annual event and opportunity. And as I was getting ready here today, I just jotted down as many as I could remember, just off the top of my head today: JRTC, Warfighter, XETC, CSTX, WarX, which are all 3 of those are Guard and Reserve sponsored collective training events, both air and ground, and joint and multinational also. Global Medic, River Assault, Prominent Hunt, Vibrant Response on the Homeland Defense side, Northern Strike, and then Saber Guardian and Pacific Guardian, or Pacific Pathways in Europe and in the Pacific Rim. That's 12 events just in the last 12 months. I have 8 battalions, so it's just a picture of how involved and how much we are committed to training both individually, collectively, to support the fight. So to wrap it up, everything we do is joint. Everything we do is total force. We have to continue to build these relationships, to train together, to find opportunity where it's at, where we can, to build this trust. Trust is built over time. You gain it in years, you lose it in minutes. So the more we work together, the better, the more capable we will be to go forward and to continue to win America's wars. One final last thought, and we all know this. The Army doesn't fight air wars. The Army fights ground wars. Army Aviation is that air element that ensures that our ground commanders can fight and win those ground wars by bringing fires, lethality, mobility, intelligence, recon, and lift, allowing us to continue to be and go forward to be the most ready, lethal, expeditionary Army Reserve, total force, Army Reserve aviation into the future. So with that, General Cope.
Thank you, General Morcom. It's an honor, it's a pleasure to be here today, and again, appreciate General Peterson for putting this panel together to talk a little bit about, again, the total Army and the total Army approach over how we move forward. And I think General Morcom said it best when we talk about relationships. And when we talk about the total Army, it is all about relationships, but it's also a matter of relationships across state boundaries, across the United States, in order to make sure that all of our assets are to bear. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit, maybe on a little different note. As a 99th Readiness Division commander, I'm one of 4 readiness commanders, and my ownership or my charge is predominantly to take care of the 13 northeastern states from Maine to Virginia, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. Part of that is also maintaining relationships between each TAG and each emergency response cell within those states. Underneath the new Army Reserve initiative to go into a more geographical relationship over ownership of the 550 units within that geographical relations, it gives us great integrated federal C2 underneath one command. So when we look at a DISCA operation, or when a bad day comes, we have the ability underneath one commander to go and bring all assets to bear, and those assets would be controlled or managed underneath the RD commander. That's a matter of reaching out and already building on the relationships that we already currently have, that we currently work with each and every day right now. But as we see that going up and we coordinate with the TAG and with the emergency response cells over what do they need, we have an opportunity to go ahead and position assets at the right point, at the right place, at the right time, no matter where or what is going on during a bad day. An example of that is during Hurricane Harvey. And when we look at our aviation assets and how we utilize our Army Reserve aviation assets during that storm, it was a matter of Lieutenant General Lucky reached out to the state TAG of Texas, asked the question, and said, what do you need? From that, the Army National Guard TAG said, I need lift assets. I need assets, medevac assets. We went ahead and we mobilized those assets in advance under immediate response authority to go ahead and move those assets out in front of the storm. We took those assets from Fort Carson and from Olathe, Kansas, and we moved them down to a location, some in front of the storm, which was down in Conroe, Texas. And then from there, we also left assets up in Fort Worth. Now the beauty of that is Once the storm lifted, and even before the storm lifted, we were able to conduct operations immediately. Again, within the first 72 hours, those assets then, some of those assets were turned over to FEMA and to the Immediate Response Authority once it rolled past 72 hours. And so underneath the RD concept, underneath the Readiness Division concept, it's a matter of ownership, but it's more importantly about relationships. And relationships before the bad day comes. And with that, I'm going to pass it back on over to General Peterson.
Thanks, appreciate it much, Troy. Give a quick overview of Division West's role in cooperation, partnership, and training with our Reserve and Guard brethren. Division West is one of 2 divisions of 1st Army. Our mission, simply stated, is to help build Guard and U.S. Army Reserve readiness. We also run the only 2 active mobilization stations in the United States Army, one at Fort Hood and one at Fort Bliss, Texas. We also have functional lead for partnering with Guard and Reserve Army Aviation, and we currently have 1 aviation training battalion under Marcus Hay, who's seated right up here in the front row, and will be our microphone maven if we have some good, insightful questions. He's based at Fort Hood, Texas. Guard and Reserve Army Aviation is certainly relevant, as you've heard from the previous discussions, and an exceptionally high demand. As a result, our mobilization load and throughput is substantial, and candidly, it's relentless. With a constant flow of aviation units ranging from full combat aviation brigades to small detachments flowing through Fort Hood en route to a combat or a contingency theater. On the slide, you see in 2-year blocks our planned throughput of formations and the number of soldiers that we train with right now, a single battalion, soon to be a brigade and an additional battalion. Enduring Guard and Reserve Army Aviation commitments range from Kosovo to Afghanistan to Kuwait and Iraq. We have an enduring National Guard Aviation Brigade in Kuwait and Iraq, which is going to soon transition in 19 to U.S. Army Reserve Lead. And then a National Guard Attack Battalion in Afghanistan, which is serving as a multifunctional aviation battalion task force headquarters under the 3rd Combat Aviation Brigade. In order to better facilitate the substantial Guard and Reserve Army Aviation contributions and commitments, and to thicken our partnering and training capacity, we are reactivating the 166th Aviation Brigade this summer. We have in the audience Colonel Ron Ells and Command Sergeant Major Kirk Coley, who will take command of that formation. They'll join Marcus Hay and his Command Sergeant Major Lopez. I don't know if he's in the audience here. And we'll add an additional aviation training brigade or battalion to that formation to gain double our capacity or throughput, and also provide us with a peer aviation brigade mentoring and partnering capability. So we're looking forward to that capacity increase. So with that, we'd love to hear your insightful questions, suggestions, and insights. And Marcus will be happy to come to you with the microphone. Thanks. Got one in the front row, Marcus.
Gentlemen, Lieutenant Colonel Lang, the State Army Aviation Officer from Michigan. Question, I guess, open to the panel. Thoughts on the exchanges that we've done between compos, leaders in formations between compos. Is that showing any signs of success? And do we think that that's going to eventually evolve into mixed compo formations at the battalion or cab level?
Any thoughts?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. Yeah, it definitely has value, but I'm gonna our position or my observation, and through time is training relationships at the unit level are a higher value to build total readiness for the Army than a onesie twosie exchange. It builds good understanding. It's very critical to have these multi-compo staffs as we go forward with the cabs. in the staff to build that, but more valuable is the 229th Battalion partnering with the 101st, doing battalion level assaults on a continual basis, building that understanding and mission capability.
Any insights from your perspective?
Yeah, General Gowan mentioned the DCO exchange. I see great value in that. Both of the combat aviation brigades deployed today are multi-compo, and they're going to continue to be so, for the foreseeable future. So the more we can build connective tissue, the better we're going to be. General McConville mentioned it in his remarks yesterday that it ought to be easier to move from one compo to another, and I want to understand that initiative's underway. So I think once that's in place, that it'll be even better than it is now. But the more we can work together and learn from one another, the more effective we're going to be, when we're called to support any type of mission requirements.
Did I get this? Okay. So I don't know if we would ever set out to do it that way intentionally. It doesn't really matter because we're doing it that way. Every deployment is multi-compo these days. So therefore, we kind of have to embrace the situation. There are certainly second-order benefits to it in that it's a diversity of thought concept. You've got leadership at all levels that are coming from different components, and every component has strengths and weaknesses and various capabilities, and we bring that to the fight. So the quicker we just accept it that it's going to be and start to learn how best to do it, the better off we're going to be, and we're getting better and better at it.
From a Division West perspective, we are a multi-compo organization at headquarters. We have U.S. Army Reserve battalions that are part of our formation. Some of them are TPU or normal M-Day, and some of those are active. They're activated for a year. Additionally, we have National Guard coded positions within our formation. The fill in those is somewhat limited just based on demands and priorities for the National Guard, but we certainly welcome that talent. We're a little bit unique in that our mission crosses all compos all the time, and having that richness and perspective is exceptionally valuable to us, and we welcome it. I will echo one of the comments, and this is a personal opinion, but I do believe that it has some merit across our Army. As we thicken the concept of total Army and follow the leadership of our chief and our secretary and their example in embracing, leveraging the talent and the capacity of our total Army, not just in aviation, I believe that there are opportunities for us to remove barriers for cross-component movement in our personnel policy and easing the ability of soldiers to complete an entire career across the three components where their talent is best needed and their will, desire, and personal circumstances allow, I think would be great benefit for our Army. And I hope that is seriously explored going forward. Do we have any other questions, please?
Hi, Jen Judson with Defense News. Congress has, the House Armed Services Tactical Air and Land Subcommittee at least, has put in their mark a request to the Army to study the possibility of putting Gray Eagle in the National Guard. And I was just wondering if any of you would be willing to weigh in on any opinions on the usefulness of the Gray Eagle in the National Guard, as well as the possibility of transferring Gray Eagle from the active component. Are there enough Gray Eagles to go around?
I'll start. I would tell you that, as the Army National Guard's aviation advocate, that yes, we would be open to that with but it has to fit the requirements of the Army, and it has to fit within our force structure allowance that we have, and all of that's coordinated between the Army and the Guard at high levels to ensure that we have the right capability. I think the Guard can man it and can operate it, that's not too hard to do. And then also with the retention of the 4 attack reconnaissance battalions, the only component that those 2 non-combat aviation brigades will not have is the UAS. So the Shadow and the Gray Eagle will not be resident in those formations. So as that technology leaps forward, we're missing that opportunity to develop that leadership. So we're open to that, but it has to really fit the needs of the Army.
Let me take a stab at that too. So I've had a lot of conversations about Gray Eagle in the past month or so, and there's certainly a lot of interest out there. It's not simply as easy as flipping a switch and fielding Gray Eagles, though. I mean, it's a big push. It's a totally new aircraft, totally new training. You have airspace issues to contend with. You've got MILCON issues to contend with. So I don't think you'll find anybody in the National Guard that think it's a bad idea, but it will take a lot of planning, resources, and I personally think it's a good fit, and we ought to have all the capabilities that the divisions need, all the same capabilities as the Compo 1 divisions for sure. So, but it doesn't come without a lot of planning and considerations.
All right. Any other questions, please?
Good morning, gentlemen, or good afternoon, gentlemen. So, Jim Matthews, Army Reserve Aviation Command, CSM. My comment is in relation to your formation, sir, now that we're bringing the 166 back online. I know you have AGR authorizations within your formation. We struggle on the 15 series for Army Reserve Aviation to keep them in our formations in the right places, the right locations in time. To the point where now we are moving into other action plans to help with accessions, such as will trains and stuff. And that's a unique opportunity for us because we're going to bring non-aviators into the formation that have zero experience. So it's going to be dependent upon us to bring them up to speed, okay? What I would recommend to your formation, sir, is 2 years out from where our brigades or our battalions are deploying, talent management, our NCOs that you require in your formation to do a tour with you for a year instead of AGRs so that we can get a lot of goodness out of the experience of collective training, bring them back to our formation for that last 12 months before they go downrange to give us to reap the rewards of having them fresh knowledge and pertinent information that they can put back into our training aspects right before they go out the door.
If you're willing to negotiate that, Sergeant Major Coley, we got a project for you. Got a project for you. Welcome the help and absolutely welcome the partnership. I suspect we will find naysayers and bureaucrats that will attempt to stymie such an initiative, but we'll link arm in arm and knock them down. But I appreciate that, and we'll take a look at it. I think it would be helpful. We could use the talent, we can use the capacity, and if we turn it around, better experienced to help the readiness of a formation that's deploying. That's a sound investment. Thanks. All right, other questions, please. All right, Jen, up again.
I think it was mentioned yesterday that...
Can you speak up just a little bit?
It was mentioned yesterday that Lakotas are being deployed overseas. I think that's not necessarily a new thing. There's been a few in Europe. But I think originally Lakotas, the idea was to sort of take the burden off of Blackhawks and use them in sort of non-combat roles. Is the National Guard considering expanding Lakota's mission maybe in Europe to help maybe lessen the burden on some of the Blackhawks over there for medevac training, things like that, or any other roles going forward? Thinking outside of the CONUS box, I guess.
Short answer, yes. We have a training exercise that's underway right now that the aircraft are actually, blades are folded and they're ready to be transported over to Europe. Then they're going to do what you described. It's Lakota medevac, and they're going to fill in the installation medevac requirements, which is going to free up an active component medevac company to participate in various training exercises, throughout that theater. So it's going to enhance the level of collective readiness within that AC formation, but also expanding the envelope of where we can utilize that asset. So it's a trial, if you will. If it's well received, then we'll continue to pursue other opportunities to utilize that aircraft. And you're right, it was initially intended to replace some of the Black Hawk capability domestically. It's performed very well. It operates at about a third the operating cost of a Black Hawk, and we saw great utility last fall during the hurricane response. And we're also looking to utilize Lakota on the southwest border. That was the aircraft with the mission equipment package. The way it's configured right now, that was what was requested. And I spent some time out there about 18 months ago, and I got to see it firsthand. So it is absolutely an ideal platform for that type of scenario.
All right, any other questions at all, please?
Sir, actually, I have.
Nope, we got.
So as a moderator, I'm not, or mic guy, I don't know if I'm supposed to ask one, but from my experience within the last 2 years, a unique perspective from First Army, I'm struck that many of the, for the lack of a better term, friction points between components comes from a lack of understanding of both strengths and weaknesses, as General Gowan mentioned. So my question is, in my opinion, is probably a way to move towards a total Army is both in shared mandated multi-component training exercises, and then second, and long-term institutionally, is how do we incorporate to improve the trust and shared understanding in line with Mission Command with regards to perhaps PME or institutional training of individuals to understand the differences, limitations, and capabilities cross-component, and that's an open question to the panel. Gentlemen.
Okay.
All right. So thank you for reading the article I wrote on Aviation Magazine. Yeah, this is one of my number one objectives in the position that I'm in now, and that is to try to stress to the various components to be more familiar with each other, identify the strengths and weaknesses, and I think training exercises are a great way to do that. And we do some of it, probably need to do more of it. Even before I got into the position now, every time I got in front of a senior leader, I tried to ask that same question of, is there a way that we can implement more component awareness into things like PME? And now that I am a senior leader, now I kind of get the microphone to be able to talk about those things, and I try to insert it every chance I get. So General Abrams from FORSCOM at the Senior Leader Forum stressed that we should stop talking about the components and focus on total Army. And kind of hard to do that. Can't just flip a switch. But it is the way of the future. The foundation of Army National Guard 4.0 that General Cademy talks about is that we cannot, Compo 1 can't satisfy all the mission requirements by itself. And we need all three compos to do it. So it is the way forward. And with all the value that the Compo 2 and 3 bring to the Department of Defense, there's a lot of great reasons to continue the way that we're set up with a total Army. So now we have to embrace that and take it one or two steps further with the familiarity and breaking down those barriers. So thanks for the question, Marcus.
Add to that?
Yeah, sure. So nothing that Army Reserve Aviation can do collectively to train any of our combat mission sets can be accomplished without going multi-compo. Just in the fact that we don't have combat divisions in the Army Reserve. So we're getting better at it. We're not as good as we need to be. We need more capacity at the National Training Center in the warfighters. We're trying to got into a warfighter this year to prepare our brigade to go forward next year, and all of the training audience was already full. So we'll be working as a robust response cell, which will get us valuable training, get us kind of where we need to go. But going forward, when we have these conferences, and we have to interject ourselves too into the discussion into the planning going in the future to say, hey, leave capacity for the reserve component. We have to exercise our cabs and our key E-cabs and our staff, and just realize that, like I said, anything and everything we do to build our combat capabilities inherently will and has to be and will continue to be multi-compo, joint, outside of the Army Reserve going forward. So, yeah, of course.
Okay, we had another question here.
Yes, sir. Colonel Andrew Doring. I'm the Deputy Commander for the Army Reserve Aviation Command, and General Morcom kind of just jumped into part of the question I wanted to ask. But part of what we struggle with is sometimes getting to be primary training audiences, especially at brigade level. So 244, like General Morcom said, is a robust response cell, not exactly a primary training target audience. In the past, years ago, we had aviation training exercises that were done. I think most of those were convened at Fort Rucker. Is there any opportunity potentially within Div West to create something like that post-MOB, where we could train our battalions and brigade headquarters as a primary training audience, maybe as a validating exercise or something that will help them get a little bit more meaningful training in that aspect than what we're trying to kind of kludge together in different exercises that are out there?
I think that's something that we can explore. Having experienced ATX at Fort Rucker, I think there'll be some challenges to replicating the sophistication of the simulation network that fed that and gave it the rigor and fidelity that I experienced as a brigade commander. But it's certainly something as we continue to build the capacity or growth through 166, build the infrastructure and the rigor and fidelity of our overall exercises, which is happening both at Fort Hood and Fort Bliss. We could target that. It's not something that we've had on our radar, and I don't know if that's something that USACE is considering renewing or reinvesting in over time. Tim, I would defer to you.
I know I keep messing with this mic. No, I have not heard from General Gaylor any mention of that. I have heard mention of cuts in resources, though. So, the resources are always a limiter. And in this case, we're not just talking about money, we're talking about time, because what you're eating into is the post-mobilization time as well. So it would be something that is worth exploring. I'm not sure I could sit here and give you a yes or no answer, but I have not heard that there's an initiative in place right now to reconsider doing that, even though there's a lot of value added, for sure.
Okay, we have another question.
Hey, sir, Lance Nation.
I'm sorry.
My question for you is, do you plan on taking the aviation assets to Idaho and into Orchard as they're moving forward with the training center as they build that? I know ground components are looking at it. Are you looking at it as an aviation standpoint?
Yeah, we got that.
I can tell you we are looking at that. I know the Director of the Army National Guard has put a great emphasis on Orchard Training Center to be a CTC-like training experience for not only Army National Guard, armor BCTs, but all compos as a potential training site. And part of that would be the aviation support necessary to ensure that we're replicating the same level of training. The challenge is where we get those aircraft from. The Army Guard has 212 Lakotas, and not every state has a Lakota unit right now. But as if additional aircraft are made available, or we're also looking at a force design update of how we optimize those 6 security and support battalions, that's being looked at as a place where if we have additional assets, we want them to go.
What I can offer as well is just from recent experience. I had the opportunity to visit Orchard just about a month and a half ago and see the expansion plans. Clearly a high demand training resource across all components. 16th Combat Aviation Brigade out of Fort Lewis, Washington routinely trains, uses that, as well as quite a few of our joint partners. You know, part of the strength of that facility is the contiguous air and ground maneuver space with other associated training areas, with Mountain Home and the northern Nevada ranges. It lends itself to joint air-ground operations on a large scale. So there's a great deal of potential there and a great deal of utility right now. All right, any other questions, team? All right, if there are no further questions, on behalf of our entire Total Army Aviation team and panel, thank you for your interest, and thank you for your insights and questions. Appreciate it.